Welcome to worship for the Unitarian Universalist community of Charlotte. I'm Jay Leach, one of the ministers of this congregation. The music that opened our service was from John Herrick, our director of music. Because of the importance of complying with the shelter-in-place, stay-at-home mandates, we're no longer able to offer services from our sanctuary. So I'm pleased to welcome you now to our home, and to John's home, and to the homes of the others in this service. Thanks for welcoming us into your home this morning. In these times, we remember more explicitly that our community is not a building, as much as we may look forward to being back there together someday. Our community resides in the hearts, the minds, and the souls of all of us, and in the liberating faith around which we cohere. Unitarian Universalism acknowledges quite explicitly that the living tradition we share draws from many sources. The we that is beyond the individual paths and preferences is rooted in and sustained by a wide range of sources, among which are, we say, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Those aren't my words, those are our words. Long before religion had belief, doctrine, creed, or ritual, it was about stories, myths. These weren't history lessons. Like all myths, they were stories told as a way of trying to make some sense out of life. As such, even now, they invite us to ask not, is it true, or did it really happen, but rather, why might someone tell such a story? And what truth might I find in it? Today, apropos to this sacred season, we listen in again on the Passover story from Judaism. Now, it's important to understand that this is a tale told from the perspective of the oppressed, the maligned, the marginalized. It's important to appreciate that at its heart, this story asks core human questions. What is enslaving us? What is enslaving others? And what would it mean for us? What would it mean for others to be liberated? Thanks for being a part of this service today. Especially if you are a guest, I welcome you on behalf of the many members of ours who are now watching this with you. I'm going to pitch it back to John, who will play through our opening song. You'll see the verses and you're invited to sing along. You might also use this time to post greetings to one another on our public Facebook page. Again, to each of you, welcome. I kindle again the flame of our sacred chalice, symbol of our liberating faith. May its beacon shine forth on this day, both to you and from you, filling the spaces between us with light. May it bring us together again, if only in this virtual way. And may we, in gathering around this flame, experience again the comforting warmth of community. The Passover story is a tale of liberation, of the enslaved finding liberation, not because their enslavers relented, but through the power of a collective spirit within them. It's a tale of the lowly being lifted up and of the mighty being brought down. It begins in Egypt, where a disjointed band of outcasts who would later come to be called Hebrews were enslaved. It includes a mystical encounter, the calling out of a guy named Moses to lead the people to their freedom. It claims, like liberation theology always does, that the divine, the spirit of life, God, if you will, is always on the side of the oppressed, over against their oppressors. It claims that the people won their freedom because the spirit of life intervened, humbling their enslavers. It includes the high drama of an escape and the mythic notion of an escape route that was through a divided sea, through walls of water that closed back in on the pursuing enslavers. It includes, in some versions, both celebration and sadness, joy for those who escaped, sorrow for those who had to lose their lives in order for the captives to go free. Poet Ray Shankman tells it in part like this in his poem, "Why is this night different from Passover sweet?" Why is this night different now that we are older and our children are with us? Each one of us crosses the same desert, helping the stragglers, lifting the forlorn and lost, helping life into life, helplessness into healing hope. We are here together, hearing each story as if it were our own, committed to keeping the story alive, the journey going. Some members of our congregation have deep identity with and connection to this story. I've invited two of them to share with us today. You'll hear first from Lauren Hood, and then after a brief musical interlude from Debbie Rubenstein. My thanks to Lauren and to Debbie for sharing their journeys with us today in this way.
Hello, my name is Lauren Hood, and my family have been members of the UUCC for over 10 years. Every year, my family hosts a Passover Seder. My large extended family spills out beyond the dining room, eating at makeshift tables throughout the house. There's lots of laughter and conversation, but we never lose sight of our purpose: to retell the story of our ancestors' liberation from slavery and symbolically relive the Exodus. For over 50 years, I have not missed a Passover Seder with my family, and I've been thrilled to share this tradition with our UUCC community. So I've been rather confronted that stay-at-home orders and social distancing will make this a very different kind of Passover. Given that I'm an extreme extrovert who doesn't do well alone or without a multitude of distractions, the prospect of a small, quiet Seder makes me very uncomfortable. On the other hand, this Passover also represents an opportunity. While Passover has great potential for personal introspection, it's been overshadowed by family reunions, crowded tables, and the desire to speed through the Seder as quickly as possible before the kids get antsy. In this moment of sequestration, perhaps I can learn to be more present, to truly contemplate the story of Passover and consider its implications for myself and for the world around me. The original purpose of the Seder was to elicit curiosity, to ask questions, and to acknowledge that we don't have all of the answers. As we remember and retell the story of enslavement, we can expand our understanding of and compassion for those persecuted today. We might also reflect on our personal confinement. What holds us back? What are we enslaved to? Matzah, made of only flour and water, represents our pure selves. Let's pause and consider negative forces that keep us from our essential selves, things like materialism and arrogance. As we dip parsley in salt water, representing tears shed in slavery, we might reflect on the tears that we've shed. And eating bitter herbs, consider what we have learned from those experiences. Passover is also a time for expressing gratitude. Dayenu, which is sung at the end of the Seder, inspires us to be grateful and to recognize that everything that we have at this very moment is enough. Kathleen McTeague, former minister of the Unitarian Society of New Haven, wrote, "After 40 years in the desert, the Israelites' journey finally reached its end. Maybe they knew, even in that moment of deep relief and readiness, that the desert was not accidental, that it had opened and cleansed them in some necessary way. Maybe they understood how the wilderness had sharpened their awareness and softened their hearts, so they could at long last receive not just the gifts of the promised land, but the gifts that the desert had brought them there. As I wade through this unfamiliar territory, my intention is to look for and benefits from the gifts that I am receiving. I invite you to join me in this new kind of Passover observance."
Good morning. I'm Debbie Rubenstein, and my family and I have been members here for 13 years. But I was raised as a Jew, and so the Passover story has long been a part of my yearly cycle. Back when I was a kid, the narrative seemed a parable of good and evil, of holy and profane. But maturity comes with moral ambiguity, and the Seder narrative itself has bloomed and warped under the weight of that ambiguity. I feel like as an adult, the question of what is the right thing for me to do has dogged my decisions, and it challenges my actions regularly. What is the right way to spend my money? Providing opportunities for my children that will allow them to be their truest and best selves in the world? or using that money to give others opportunities that my family already has? How should I spend my time? Should I support the work of those who are struggling to learn to advocate for themselves? Or should I lead work that allows me to stretch into my expertise and talents? How should I spend my love? Should I spend it on my family, meeting their needs and their wants? Or should I divide my attention between them and maybe my larger family or my larger community? The story we tell on Seder has provided me with a moral compass of sort, a rare one that points both north and south to both good and evil. It reminds me that dividing my choices into the duality I just described is not how things work. Like life, the Seder story is not populated by pure people. Instead, each actor in the saga of slavery and redemption comes with a full slate of flaws and blessings, just as I do. Holy Moses, well, he led his people to freedom, he persuaded Pharaoh, and he abandoned his own privilege to fight for the downtrodden. But his transformation begins when he murders someone, and he ends up banished from the Holy Land because of transgressions against God he commits in the desert. How about evil Pharaoh? Well, he resisted liberation, of course, and he murdered Jewish babies in hopes of retaining his power. But he was also softened by Moses' pleas, and he wept as his people were decimated by the plagues. Well, what about God? In this story, God too is complicated. Yes, he protected and led the Jews to freedom, and he wept as the Egyptians were slain. But Talmud also tells us that it was God who hardened Pharaoh's heart after each plague, condemning the Egyptian people to the hardship, suffering, and death that they endured. Without God, Pharaoh would have been quickly persuaded. And it is God who drowns the Egyptians, and God who banishes Moses and Aaron for the same sins I just mentioned, sins that scholars have struggled to find terrible enough to merit such a punishment. Reading and living with this story teaches me a way of seeing myself and my own actions. I do good things in the world, but those good things are paired with bad outcomes, intended or not. If I cannot make a perfect choice, what am I to do? The story, for me anyway, tells me that what I must do is act, assess, and then act better. Must try hard and then harder to maximize the good and minimize the bad. If I wait for perfection, then there will be no action, and without action, there can be no change. For me, especially as I deal with the uncertainty of the current modern plague we're all confronting, and as I am challenged with a host of new questions about how to act and respond, I remind myself that history does not progress through blameless acts, but through considered acts, which are then reconsidered and then reacted again and again.
Hers was a life so dramatic that it hardly seems real, so cinematic that the only surprise is that it took so long for it to find its way to the big screen. Named Araminta Ross at birth, then nicknamed Minty by her mom, she was one of Benjamin and Harriet Ritt Green Ross's 9 children. She was born into slavery on a March 1820 day in Bucktown, Dorchester County, Maryland. on the plantation of Edward and Mary Pattison Broadus. From a young age, her mother told her stories, Bible stories. She would remain a devout, faith-filled Christian for her whole long and adventuresome life. While still a young girl, a blow to her head left her both enfeebled and inclined to dreams, visions, trance-like imaginings. She came to regard these mystical experiences as revelations, premonitions given to her by God. In 1844, Araminta Ross married John Tubman, a free black man. Taking his last name, Tubman, as her own, she also changed her first name to that of her mother, Harriet, thus becoming, at that time and in the esteemed annals of our nation's history, Harriet Tubman. 5 years later, Harriet Tubman decided to attempt an escape. Though John, her husband, refused to accompany her, she still set out on September 17th, 1849, accompanied by two of her brothers, who soon turned back in fear. But she pressed on, aided by members of the Underground Railroad, until at last she reached Philadelphia and freedom. She began working with the abolitionists William Still and John Brown, eventually helping Brown plan his notorious raid on Harper's Ferry. She also became a household servant, and she started saving her money. You see, Harriet Tubman was not content with her own liberation. She wanted emancipation for others as well. So, risking her own freedom, she headed back south, back to those still oppressed, still enslaved. She went to lead them out, aiding dozens and dozens in their flights to freedom. 19 times she'd return and would later say famously, "I was a conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." Harriet Tubman became the most widely recognized symbol of the Underground Railroad. So great was her reputation that the renowned abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison would give her a nickname. He called her Moses, the Moses of her people. By appealing to that profound analogy, that powerful name, Garrison invoked the Passover story. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. An oppressed, enslaved 19th century people identifying with an ancient myth. They were hearing the story as if it were their own, committed to keeping the story alive, the journey going. And among the boldest of them all, a diminutive, fierce woman with her mind always stayed on freedom, named Minty, Harriet Moses. He was born Moshe Zakharovich Shagalov, Moshe or Moses. Born in July 1887, the eldest also of 9 children, to a Lithuanian Jewish Hasidic family in a village near the city of Vitebsk in what is now Belarus. His father was a herring merchant. His mother sold groceries out of the home. It was a home, ironically, devoid of all art. When Moshe showed artistic interest and promise as a young boy, it confused his impoverished parents, but earned his mother's support. In his late teens, he'd moved to St. Petersburg to study art, and then to Paris shortly thereafter. In time, Moshe Zakharovich Shagalov would also change his name, becoming Marc Chagall, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. In 1932, he began the first of 24 lithographs that would become his remarkable series called The Story of Exodus. Over the next 2.5 decades, from France to the United States and back to France, Chagall continued adding to the series, depicting in his distinct style scenes from this dramatic myth. They were created, those gorgeous paintings were created just before, during, and immediately after the rise of the Nazis and the horrors of the Holocaust. And yet, even then, this man, initially named Moses, was inspired to paint the Exodus story in vivid colors with strong lines, retelling in images that profound account of liberation. Long after it was first exhibited in 1956, Chagall would speak of these works. To my way of thinking, he'd say, these paintings do not illustrate the dreams of a single people, but that of humankind. All humans, collectively and individually, longing for liberation. Hearing this story as if it were our own, committed to keeping the story alive, the journey going. On this difficult day, in these emotionally exhausting times, we might pause to remember that Passover's story is rooted in a time of profound sadness and challenge. Passover may include liberation and celebration, but it is full of sadness and sorrow, of loss of life and the challenge of enduring a demanding wilderness journey toward freedom. We might pause to remember that the power of this story to stoke and sustain the hopes of enslaved Africans longing for their freedom, one of whom would become their Moses. We might pause to remember the power of this story to stoke the imagination of a Jewish painter named Moshe, rescued from the terror of the Nazis and moved to paint his biblical namesake again and again and again. Passover may be just the right story in a time of a pandemic. For who of us today does not feel captive in ways we never could have anticipated just a few weeks ago? Who of us is not now longing to be free, to be able to move about again, to make contact again, to see our families and our friends again on something other than a screen? But perhaps this crisis, this global crisis, bringing the world as we know it to our knees, is inviting us to deeper reflection. How might this be your story? You identify with those experiencing enslavement? Is there something in your life that is restraining and restricting you? Some fear, some shame, some impossibly high standard of yourself, especially in these times, some oppressive relationship, an addiction, some untenable professional situation, or stifling family role. What's holding you back from the life you would love to lead? How might you find in the power of this story what Harriet Tubman and Marc Chagall found? The power to imagine being released, liberated, set free. Perhaps you identify with those singing and dancing on the freedom shores of the sea. Perhaps even now you are deeply aware of feeling free. What brought you to this place in your life? Who helped you? Who encouraged you? Who enabled you to become free? How might you express the depth of your gratitude? How might you use your liberation to free others, your power to empower others, your privilege to recognize and support others? Sing of your freedom, write it, paint it, dance it, that others in its beacon may find their liberation. Perhaps you identify with those on the long, ever so long journey toward a land of promise. You've left the comfortable, the easier, the familiar, on a hope-filled adventure, only to find yourself in a wilderness. How might you find in the power of this story the capacity, the encouragement, the renewed intent to keep on? Tempted to give up, to give in, to relapse, to go back. How might this become the story of your determination? This is a powerful tale told at family seders for generations, passed along, reworked and retold in new and imaginative ways. It's not about believing. It's about becoming free. We are here together, hearing each story as if it were our own, committed to keeping the story alive, the journey going. May it be so. welcome again to each of you on this day. And thank you again for pausing to participate in our virtual service. If you are a guest of our congregation, if you happened upon this video, if you've been directed here perhaps by a member or someone else, and you're interested in finding out more about us, I hope you'll contact our membership coordinator. Her name is Kelly Green. You can email her at Kelly, Kelly, at UUCCharlotte.org. Kelly at UUCCharlotte.org. You can also find information on our website. Thanks to so many of you members who continue to access our service this way and who continue to send such appreciative and supportive messages. They mean a great deal to us. We're challenged by technology and by all the limitations that it creates, and we're honored to continue to offer services as best we can. I want to offer a very special thanks this week to Belinda Parry, our administrative assistant, who has proved invaluable in stitching this service together from various homemade videos that we are creating. Belinda, thank you so much on behalf of the whole congregation. We continue to find ways to connect to one another. Each Tuesday and Thursday at 5:30, we'll continue with our community check-in, an opportunity, unstructured, simply to see one another and share how one's day's going. We'll do another community sing-along on Wednesday evening with John at 7 o'clock. Look on our website at currents, at the other activities that we are offering. I'm so pleased we're continuing to offer robust activities for our kids and ways for them to continue connecting and feeling a part of us. We pause now as a community and bring to our awareness those whose needs are particularly close to us on this day. We are aware that there are those in our congregation who are experiencing very intense and challenging needs at this time. We hold with love and in our prayers Sharon Baker and Pete Moore and their whole family, as Sharon carries such deep concern for her sister, now hospitalized in New Jersey. We hold with love on this day Caroline Corzine and Craig and your whole family. Caroline lost her dad, is unable to go to be with her family, is grieving apart from them. We hold you with love on this day. We continue to remember Shirley and Paul Wagner. We now know of a concern in the family of Priscilla Claiborne, a child of her daughters born very premature, continuing in NICU, and we hold them in our prayers. We hold Barbara and Mike Searing in our prayers. Barbara has been hospitalized, and Barbara, we send you a lot of love. Mike. If you experience a need, a concern in your life, we want to know about it. Please contact Martha Knisley, our adult programming coordinator, or contact me directly. We want to know about your concern. We hope you will share them with us. We care deeply. On this day, we're profoundly aware that we are in a community in need. So many of our neighbors so vulnerable at this time. We hold them in our prayers. And we watch as a world is so humbled by this experience. And we expand our hearts to include them. Those of you who regularly participate in our services are aware that we have candles on stands, and we invite anyone, member, visitor alike, to come forward and light those candles while music is being played. And regrettably, because we are now worshiping virtually, we don't have that opportunity, but symbolically, I light candles today for each of you. The first holding close and deep in our hearts the members of our own congregation, the members of our families, the members of our households. We weave together our lives in love in the lighting of this first candle. The second is for those vulnerable members of our community, the chronically homeless, those who are serving us, healthcare workers, sanitation workers, grocery workers, others making our lives possible at this time. First, a candle for each of you, then a candle for the vulnerable and those serving us in our community. We're able to continue offering what we are because of the generosity of our members. I'm deeply touched that some of you have made a point of contacting us directly and indicating your intent to continue your support. Some of you even expanding your support to make sure that we can continue in these difficult times. There are ways to give. There's a Contribute Now button on your video. There are other ways that you can support our congregation through your financial support. Thank you very much for your generosity and for making all that we are doing possible. I invite you now to settle yourself, to ground yourself where you are, to bring as much quiet into your space as you are able. And I invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes and settle into a time of meditation. Pause now, and again. to breathe deeply. Calm your anxious, racing mind for this moment. Look deeply within. For what are you thankful? For whom are you thankful? Imagine from the very core of your soul a glow, a warmth, a beacon of light and love. To whom will you extend it on this day? Who are you holding deeply in love? Remember the world beyond your walls. Remember that today flowers and bushes and trees are in bloom, profuse in their profligate beauty. Remember that today the world offers itself to you again, beckoning you to embrace the fullness of your freedom, to act, to speak, to co-conspire, that others may be free as well. Our hearts, though apart, beat in a common rhythm, a shared longing for justice, for compassion, for the marginalized to find their way to freedom, and for the mighty to cease their exploitation. Pause now and again, to breathe deeply. And to breathe deeply again. Amen. And now, as our service moves to its close, these words. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to one another. Go in peace.